r/nosleep. Posted by you/RisingMac. I do under the table, shady jobs for people. You might say I'm a problem solver. My most recent job was my last one for a while. Part 1. I'll start off by saying that I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not even in the medical field at all, but you probably don't need to be told that to know what I mean when I say I help people with their problems. Now I know what you're probably thinking right off the bat, so I'll just nip that in the bud right now. I am not a hitman. I'm not here to glorify killing people or make myself sound like I'm as cool as James Bond. While I do not deny my lifestyle is somewhat nefarious, I agree with the guy in Dumb and Dumber, you don't kill people you don't know, it's a rule. I tend to focus more on easier things such as data theft, evidence planting, mostly taking down corrupt cops, sending threatening messages to people refusing to pay debts, or PI work in general. My services can be found amongst the many other questionable and seedy things found on the dark web. So that's me basically, I'm sure you get the idea. What I really want to talk about is my latest job and how fucked up it was. Somebody has to know what happened. Here's the short version of the backstory. This guy got in touch with me about a job in his office building. He said the top 3 floors were empty shell spaces on paper, but in actuality it was a secret government lab. I didn't believe this, but he said the job was to hack his boss's computer since the blueprints to this lab were on there. His boss is some executive and also has an access code on his computer to get into the lab. He also wanted me to crack the lab and access the employee database on a computer there since his girlfriend worked in this lab and disappeared when it went into some kind of lockdown days ago. He said that computer stays logged in so no hack would be necessary. I told him forget the lab if it's supposed to be a secret facility, way too risky, but I would be able to get his boss's computer and download anything on there that he wanted. I didn't actually believe there would be blueprints there, but I told him I'd try. I told him my fee and he agreed, but added if I hit the lab they have a safe in the administration area that has $15,000 in cash. It was an all-cash operation to avoid electronic trails. That safe is not locked because nobody who works there is stupid enough to try and rip it off. I told him I might consider it, but 99% chance still being no, especially if it was on some kind of lockdown. He agreed to take whatever I could get and gave me a key card from a janitor who normally cleans the boss's office. That guy would take the night off and I'd be a fill-in. Before I left I told him do not, under any circumstance, attempt to contact me again. Success or fail I'd find him. I showed up the next night and it was go time. I didn't say much to the other janitors. Those that asked about me I simply told I was a fill-in for tonight. Most of them were older minorities and didn't really seem to give a shit who I was. I followed everyone else and found where the cleaning carts were stored. I took one and headed for the elevators. I hit 45 and up I went. I stepped off the elevator and found the office consisted of quite a few cubicles. There were a few larger, closed-in offices for important people, but otherwise it was kind of dark and cramped looking. My job might sound like fun, but most of the time it's not. If I'm on camera that means I need to look like I belong there. This means if I'm supposed to be a janitor, I need to be doing things janitors do. This means emptying garbage, cleaning cubicles, and wiping down windows. I did this for several hours while I made my way towards what appeared to be the director's office. I moved over to it and swiped my card and pushed my card in. I did a quick sweep of the room and there was no camera in there. Perfect. I started by emptying the garbage, then I wiped down his desk. I nonchalantly looked out onto the floor and could only see one other janitor who was quite far away cleaning some cubicles. I immediately put on my gloves, sat down at the computer and plugged in my flash drive. It was imperative I crack this computer as fast as possible. I try a few passwords with the information the guy gave me and can't get in. He'd told me the password would be related to the boss's family somehow. I look around his office for anything that might give me a hint. After the 5th failure I catch a stroke of luck. He had password reminder on, which is stupid for anyone let alone a government computer. After it failed, it said hint, everybody's birthday's beneath where you enter the password. It took a couple guesses but I was in. I stood up and pretended to clean some more, taking the opportunity to check if anybody was nearby. The other janitor was still pretty far away. I jumped back onto the computer and started checking the image files. It took a few minutes but I found a hidden file labeled blueprints. I clicked it and it brought up a PowerPoint of the blueprints for the building's top few floors. My God, I nearly shit myself. He wasn't lying. According to these blueprints there was a secret lab in this building. I copied it and moved it to the flash drive. That's it, I got it. I checked again and the guy I was watching was gone. I decided to quickly snoop around some more for anything else I could find on this lab. After a few seconds I found a hidden folder that contained his access code. I still had no intention of hitting the lab. I started wrapping up and removed my flash drive. I was about to close the last window and log out when I noticed one more program in this hidden folder. It was labeled Lab Feed. I pretended to clean some more and checked for anybody, then jumped back on the computer. It brought up a window and a picture of what appeared to be a security camera. First floor, West Hall was in the bottom right-hand corner. There were date and time stamps for right at that moment in the view as well. This appeared to be a live feed from the lab. I checked around the window that had opened and it appeared to be a security program. I was able to check multiple cameras. I went through, checking time stamps to make sure the feed was still live, until I returned to the first one I saw. The first floor of the lab looked completely deserted, including administration and the safe in the security area. I tried to bring up the second floor. It also looked deserted, but only about half the cameras worked. Most of them said feed unavailable. I then tried the third floor, which according to the blueprints I looked at was where the main labs were for whatever they were doing. None of those cameras worked. Instead of feed unavailable, they were all simply static. I closed the cameras and after checking one last time for anybody, I decided I wanted to check this guy's email just in case. I wanted to see if he had anything related to the lockdown. It had only been about 5 minutes since I logged on to his computer. I had time. I checked the dates from when it supposedly occurred and found something from 2 days ago. This is an automated response. Do not reply, breach detected in Lab 6, 3rd floor. Initiating lockdown protocol Alpha 1. Cleanup crew dispatched, expect arrival within 3 days. Await further instruction at this time and do not attempt to enter lab complex. I continued scrolling and there was something else suspicious from earlier in that same day. This is an automated response, do not reply, unauthorized download of sensitive information detected in Lab 5. Silent alarm activated. You do not need to take any action at this time, situation will be handled internally. Please allow up to 3 days for arbitrator arrival. Do not confer with anyone on this matter or you may face sanction up to and including termination. Interesting. Wonder what that meant. I closed all the windows I opened and logged out. I tell myself it's time to go but somehow can't shake the feeling that I could still hit the lab. The breach was on the 3rd floor and possibly some of the 2nd. The 1st floor was completely clear and administration was right there near the elevator. 5 minutes, in and out. That's it. I decided I'm going for it. I'd never done anything this risky, it was stupid and I was being sloppy, but the feeling was also exhilarating. The 1st floor was empty. In and out. I was going to be in and out. I returned to my cart and moved on. I closed the door to the director's office and made sure it was locked. I walked around the floor until I found a closed office with a pretty major looking door. With a door like this I didn't even need to read the sign next to it that said security, restricted area to know this was it. I scoped it out as I walked by and everything seemed fine. Nobody else was really near me, in fact it seemed like there were only 2 or 3 other cleaners on this entire floor with me. Can't really complain about that I guess, just not used to it being this easy to avoid staff. I parked my cart near a cubicle by security and whipped out the lab coat I had concealed. It was rolled up and I tucked it under my arm as I quickly made my way to the security door. I stepped up to it and punched the director's administrative code in and I heard a lock release and the door slid open. I slipped inside and let it close behind me. There were no windows in this office so it was perfect. There was a camera right on the door so I knew I was made, but at the same time I wasn't worried. I went up to the desk that I assumed was their main station and checked the computer. My hunch was right, this was a computer similar to the one in the lab that was always logged in. This wasn't my first rodeo with security programs. This is why I wasn't worried about being seen entering the office, most of these programs were all very similar. I turned off all the cameras to the floor and proceeded to delete the footage from the time range of about 5:30 p.m. up until that point. I felt much better about going into the lab knowing footage with my face was now gone. I peeked in the back room of the office and sure enough there was a large, 2-door elevator back there. There was of course another camera pointed directly at it, the only other camera in the office, good thing I turned them off. I put on the lab coat and took a black ski mask out of my cargo pant pocket. It was the kind that had a single, large hole for your eyes, kind of like a ninja mask. I refused to use a cookie cutter, old school ski mask with 2 holes for your eyes and a hole for your mouth. They look ridiculous. Anyway, I wouldn't have time to fuck around with the cameras in the lab so I couldn't let my face be showing. I used the director's code again and heard a ding and the doors opened. I entered the elevator and hurriedly pushed one and after what seemed like an hour the door closed and we went up. The doors opened up to the lab and I couldn't help but notice how white everything was. It was extremely clean and fresh inside, but it was also deathly quiet. The hum of some electronics and computers and the bright LED lighting was all I could hear. I quickly exited the elevator and turned left. I could see administration about 20 feet away. I rushed in and found the computer I needed, right where I was told it would be. I looked around quickly and the place was as deserted as it had looked on camera. I sat down at the computer and did my thing. It took me a few seconds, but I found an Excel document titled Employee List. I opened it and found a list of about 30 or so names. I quickly copied it to my flash drive. I wondered if the director would get another email about unauthorized data transfer. I thought to myself, who cares? I'll be long gone before anyone gets here to investigate. I then searched for clocking information. My client had said he wanted proof nobody had ever clocked out either. Not sure what kind of program it would be, I kind of blindly searched around for a minute until I found time clock. I clicked it and it brought up another list, the same list of names. They all had clock-in information from 2 days ago, now almost 3 since it was getting close to midnight. Nobody on this list appeared to have ever clocked out. I copied it and moved it to the flash drive. This was fucking awesome. I could not believe I was doing this. There was only one thing left, the safe in the security area. I checked my watch. I had only been in the lab for about 2.5 minutes, there was still time. I went further into administration, trying to remember what the blueprints had showed. I went left, then a right, then straight ahead for about 30 feet. I came to a crossroad and sure enough, security was there on my left. I slipped in quickly and found the safe behind their main desk, open just as I had been told. At this time an alarm started dinging. Fuck. I tripped an alarm somehow. I panicked for a second before I discovered it was the fire alarm going off. Why the fuck is that going off? It's okay, it's not so bad, I just had to move. I'm right there at the safe and I'll be out of the lab in literally 90 seconds. The safe was about the size of a gun safe, about 4 feet high. I slipped the door open and looked inside. There was a vacuum-sealed clear bag containing bundles of $50 bills, a lot of bundles. I could kind of see why they left it open now. The money was in an airtight, sealed bag. Nobody would be able to take a few bills when no one was looking. The count security did must have been to just make sure the bag was still there and sealed. I picked the bag up and turned it over. There was a white label on it with $125,000 written on it. I nearly had a heart attack. $125,000 in cash, the dude said there'd be like 15. This was no longer a data theft, this was a heist, baby. I'm retiring after this. I pull my folded up backpack out of my other cargo pocket. It's the kind that is very flimsy and can be folded up very small into itself. I pop it open and drop the money bag inside. It was heavy. I shoulder the bag and start running for the lobby. I'm almost back to the main hall when I hear the main elevator ding. I stop dead in my tracks and nearly shit my pants. Someone is here. I very carefully peek out the door just enough to see. I hear the doors open and there's a pause before somebody comes out. 2 very serious looking commandos, dressed all in black complete with gas masks, slowly exit the elevator holding what look like MP5s, fully extended in tactical formation. One looks left and takes up a position, the other to the right. I duck back in so they don't see me. Clear. Oh my fucking god, it's the cleanup crew. The fire alarm must have been to clear the building before they entered. What the fuck am I gonna do now? This is why you don't get greedy, folks. Stay in your comfort zone when you do shady things like this. I'm dead. I hear more movement outside, sounds like more commandos exiting the elevator. 2 units on the elevator at all times, someone says gruffly. Must be the squad leader. I duck back into administration, trying to find some place to hide. I stay down as I work my way back towards security. Download what command wants, then wipe everything, I hear a voice say. Next unit head to security. 2 things were going through my head, I need to stay ahead of these guys and out of sight, and how the hell am I going to get out of here with 2 of them guarding the elevator? I move away from security and figure I'm almost to the back of the administration area which would spill out into the main hall again. I come to an opening with no door. This would be the main hallway on the opposite side of the elevator. I heard feet shuffling out in the hall. I duck behind a desk and see 2 units walk by in the hallway, guns up. South hallway clear, perimeter secured. They moved away and rounded the corner. Money is gone, I hear a voice faintly behind me. Someone is still active. Shit. I peek out into the hallway and I see a stairwell door about 30 feet away in the southwest corner. I really do not want to go up to the 2nd floor since half the cameras were out, but the idea that I can hide out on 2 while they secure the 1st floor, then sneak back down and hide out in an already secured area goes through my mind. I stay down and quickly make my way to the stairs. I don't move too fast since I don't want them to hear me, but I also need to move my ass out of there. I peek around the corner and it's clear, so I quickly make for the door. I quietly open it and then close it slowly so it doesn't make too loud a noise. Hopefully nobody was looking at cameras and saw me. I find myself in a very basic looking stairwell. I slowly make my way up. The stairs are metal and I don't want to make too much noise since it might echo. I stop at 2 and peek through the small window in the door and don't see anything. The coast appears to be clear. I slowly open the door and peek out further into the hall. It's the same layout as the first floor, with a main hallway encircling the entire perimeter. The thought that half the cameras were out on this floor really had me concerned, but there was really nowhere else I could go. I saw a set of double doors down the hall and think that's my best bet, as long as they are unlocked. I raced down the hall and grabbed the handle of the door on the right and gave it a yank. It opened and I ducked in, not even bothering to look in first. It was dark in this room. Most of the lights are flickering, but it's at least bright enough to be able to see. I see lots of booths and tables with chairs set up. This must be the cafeteria. The wall straight ahead had a large rectangular hole cut out. Must be the kitchen back there, and the hole is where they serve the food. I felt a bit of relief, if only for a moment. The cafeteria was not one of the rooms I saw from the feed, so any cameras in here were out. They wouldn't see me in here from downstairs. I take a seat in a darker area of the cafeteria next to a pillar away from the door and try to think of my next move. I don't get much time to ponder before I hear something in the kitchen. At first it was just the sound of someone moving, but then I heard a tremendous crash, like someone had pushed over a large rack of dishes or kitchen gadgets. I then heard another crash as well as footsteps, and these footsteps were heavy. From the sound of things, whatever it was either 2 people or it was on 4 legs. I got my answer a few seconds later when the flimsy double doors to the kitchen began to part and something walked out into the cafeteria. What the fuck is that? I ducked down behind a booth and tried to get a better look at this thing as it strutted into the cafeteria. It was the most fucked up thing I'd ever seen. It was on all 4s, but it very much resembled a gorilla. As in, its front appendages were clearly arms and its hind legs looked capable of standing upright if it wanted to. I said it looked like a gorilla, but it was at least twice as large. And it was ugly. It looked like it was made of rock, like it had scales or something for skin. It had small, patchy sections of what appeared to be black fur all about its body, and it appeared to be completely soaking wet, though it must not have been since no water or moisture was dripping off of it at all. Its arms were much longer than its legs, which was probably why it preferred being on all 4s. Its hands made fists which looked like miniature wrecking balls and made small cracks in the floor when it walked from its weight and I'm sure strength. Its head was the worst. It was some horrible mix of the predator and an insect. I say predator because its lower jaw appeared to be similar in that it opened out to the sides and not up and down. Gnashing, awful teeth hid behind those mandibles. It had glowing red eyes and made a disgusting, wet gurgling sound that I can only imagine was its respiration. It strolled out further into the cafeteria, pushing tables and chairs out of the way with its massive body with ease. It stopped after a few feet, put its face up into the air and appeared to inhale several times, each with a positively nauseating sound. It lowered its head again and turned to look in my direction. I felt like my eyes locked into those awful, hellish red lights and I ducked down further. I wasn't sure if it saw me, but did that even matter? Did it smell me, and that is what it was doing? Sniffing? It let out a sound I have trouble describing. Its lower jaws opened sideways and it let out a shriek that sounded low and deep and got steadily higher in pitch, and it let out what I would call grunts. What it sounded like was a deep motor rev from a Harley, or what really popped into my head for some reason were the pod race sound effects from Star Wars. Like the dun 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 as they flew by in some of the scenes. It's hard to describe things I've never heard. After it let out this horrible sound, it started walking over to where I was hiding. I guess it was sniffing and it smelled me out. Tables and chairs were either plowed out of the way or crushed in its path. I think to myself, holy fucking shit, what do I do? It knows I'm there, so I decide to run for it. The doors were too far away and this thing was too close. I turned around and think to myself, the kitchen, the cutout part of the wall. I stand up, and before I start to run it stops and stands upright on its hind legs and lets out another strange sound. I dive onto countertop and start crawling across it, turning around just in time to see it start to crouch back down. Before it got back on all 4s, it pounded the ground with both hands like a gorilla showing aggression and started to run towards me. The ground pound left a crater in the floor and was so loud they must have heard it downstairs. I had fallen onto the kitchen floor by that time, and I stood up and see it barreling toward me. The floor in the kitchen was wet since water had leaked from somewhere, and there were broken dishes everywhere, so the floor was kind of slippery. Anyway, I get the fuck out of the way as it crashes through the wall without losing a step. This thing was a bulldozer. It was moving so quickly that with the water and all the crap that was on the kitchen floor, it completely slid out and toppled over when it tried to stop. I quickly ran back out into the cafeteria through the huge hole it had just made but didn't get very far. The ground was slippery and I didn't move as fast as I should. I felt a massive force hit me from behind that shot me forward. After I landed next to some rubble I realized the thing must have head-butted or punched me or something. How did it get up so fast? If I hadn't still been wearing the backpack my back probably would have been broken. The huge brick of money took the majority of the blow. Hurt like hell nonetheless. I try to start getting up and it's coming up on me fast. It starts to slow down as it approaches, like it's a cat or something getting ready to strike. With only seconds to do so I look around for something, anything, to attempt to defend myself. I see something in a pile of rubble just to my left, a fire extinguisher that had gotten knocked loose from wherever on the wall it was before the creature destroyed it. Running purely on adrenaline as the creature was only a few feet away about to pounce, I grabbed it, pulled the pin and let her rip. I didn't expect it to do anything and was sure I was about to die painfully but, much to my surprise, it actually worked. The initial blast consumed its body in a hail of white. It let out a different shriek, one that sounded to me like pain, and it backed up and shook its body wildly, like it was trying to shake off something attached to it. I'm not entirely sure of the chemical makeup of a fire extinguisher, but whatever they have this thing did not like it. I stood up and hit it again. It backed up some more and continued to shriek and convulse hideously as it backed away. After a few more seconds it turned around and charged away from me. It blasted through another wall of the cafeteria and out into the bright, main hallway. It crashed into the outer wall which didn't budge and then took off down the hall. I wasn't sure what to do at that point. I didn't want to go out into the main hallway since Kong, stupid nickname, I know, was going to be out there now. I checked the only other wall that didn't have a hole in it and found another entrance to the cafeteria tucked away in a corner. I went to the door and opened it a small amount to look out. This hallway was darker, lights looked out in here as well. Emergency lights seemed to be active though so it wasn't too dark. I slowly made my way out into this hallway. It was much narrower than the main hall, probably a connector. I come to an intersection and turn right since it's the most well lit. After about 20 or 30 feet I come to a huge, metal door. They look like blast doors and judging by the crack running awkwardly down the center of the doors they open left and right. It seemed pretty solid as I searched around for a possible way to open it, not sure if I even wanted to open it. I saw a plaque on the wall that said Lab 2, recalling the email I had read that said the breach was in Lab 6. I went a little further ahead and saw a glass door at the end of the hallway that led to a familiar bright, white area. I decided to head back and check for somewhere else to go since I didn't want to run into the soldiers or Kong again. After a few more turns I came to another large set of doors, except this time they were open. It was labeled Lab 1. I slowly approached it and peered in. The lighting was low and like the cafeteria a lot of the lights were flickering. The lab itself looked like the bridge of some kind of spaceship. There were monitors everywhere, workstations with computers and more monitors, pressure gauges, consoles, you name it. Some of the electronics were sparking and making ZZZT sounds. I could hear a faint alarm coming from above. It was making a short boop sound at timed intervals, sounded like every other second. I looked up to see what it could be and saw a large hole in the back right corner of the room. I immediately tense up, what the fuck else came down here through that? I suddenly got very nervous. What other creatures were up here waiting for me to wander into their midst? Is this what they were doing up here, making these creatures? Or were these creatures somehow a side effect of their experiments? Was the breach these creatures escaping? I think to myself there's literally nobody who is going to be able to answer these questions. If there's creatures like Kong running around here, especially on the 3rd floor, everybody must be dead. I don't have time to think about anything else. I hear what sounds like a rattlesnake shaking its tail, much louder than an actual snake of course, and guess where it's coming from? The hole in the ceiling. I look up just in time to see legs appearing from above, more and more keep appearing. I think to myself, oh God, no. Please don't be a spider creature. It was a spider creature, and it had more than 8 legs. A lot more, we're talking 30 or 40. After a few seconds the whole creature had emerged from the hole and positioned itself on the ceiling. It was massive, bigger than a full-size dump truck. The amount of legs it had seemed endless, connected to a body that resembled a bumblebee. It was fat, looked fuzzy, and had an ugly-looking ass that probably housed a stinger big enough to pierce a bank vault door. Its head was the worst though, I want to vomit even thinking about it. It appeared to be an armless, headless, humanoid torso. Not a human torso, it was too big, but it was in the same shape. It even looked like it had sockets where the arms should be and the top of it looked like there really was once a head there. But that wasn't even the worst part, the torso was positively covered with eyeballs. Eyeballs everywhere. Most were small, but there were a couple that appeared to be the size of a football. And they kept blinking. All of them at different times. I was so in shock at what I was seeing I might have been killed if it hadn't started rattling again to snap me out of it. I couldn't see an orifice or pinpoint where the rattle was coming from, but I didn't care. I turned and started to run. I ran out into the hall and realized there is no way this thing is going to fit in here. I hear it stop moving, so I turn around. I see a large, fat tentacle floating into the air exit the lab. I can see a huge eyeball on the end glaring at me. A gigantic spider wasn't enough, it had to have tentacles too? The eyeball tentacle doesn't travel far before it stops. After a few seconds another tentacle comes out, it's even fatter. I start backing up but get entranced when the tentacle starts convulsing. After a few seconds of this, the tip of the tentacle opens up in 4 directions like a potted flower and shits out a gloppy, slimy booger. The booger convulses for a few seconds before it jumps up on its many legs, and I realize what it is. It's a fucking spawn. Of course this thing can spawn out babies just like that. I turn and run for it. Not sure where I'm going and blindly taking turns, it catches up to me after about 30 seconds. I hear it leap with a high-pitched squeal and once again feel pressure on my back as it knocked me down. I felt its disgusting, spidery legs touching me everywhere. The backpack saved me again, but this time it cost me. The spider spawn wrestled me on the ground for a few seconds, and once I realized it had a death grip on the backpack, I slid out of it and rolled away. It retreated quickly back the way we came, thinking it must have gotten its food. I realized I was outside Lab 2 again and I needed a plan fast. I couldn't think of anything since I was probably going to die in this lab. If it wasn't the commandos shooting me, it was going to be God knows what kind of creature. I almost burst out laughing out of pure insanity. That's twice now the money saved my life. But now it was gone. My luck surviving these encounters was about to run out. I composed myself and told myself the first order of business was to find some place secure to hide. There had to be somewhere safe around here. I got my answer as soon as I stood up. The doors to Lab 2 opened up with a pressurized creak. They opened up about halfway and stopped. "Get in here," someone yelled. I didn't think twice. I practically dove in and whoever was in here closed the door behind me. Come on, he yelled to himself as the door slowly closed. There seemed to be a huge breath of relief with everyone in the lab when they finally closed. I looked around the room. There were 4 scientists, 1 a woman, and what appeared to be a commando from downstairs, minus his mask, helmet, and weapons. Probably lab security. Survivors. Maybe now I could get some answers as to what exactly the fuck is going on around here. I do under the table, shady jobs for people. You might say I'm a problem solver. My most recent job was my last one for a while. Part 2. I oriented myself to my surroundings and took in the fact I had found some survivors. The 3 male scientists looked like complete and total geeks. Sorry to sound so stereotypical if any actual non-geek scientist is reading this. But the female was kind of hot. I suddenly think to myself, is this my client's girlfriend? "I'm guessing you're not supposed to be here," the security-looking guy said to me frankly. At this point I realized I was still wearing my ski/ninja mask. I must have looked ridiculous wearing cargo work pants, work boots, and a ski mask while wearing a lab coat. I opted not to take my mask off. There was a chance I might end up escaping with someone in this room. I didn't want them knowing who I was. I also thought we'd probably, hopefully, be going down to the first floor again. I didn't want my face on camera. "Actually, I was here for the money," I stammered, not caring that they knew. It didn't matter anymore. "But it's gone now." "That's some heist," he chuckled. "How the hell do you end up here?" The supposed cleanup crew arrived literally as I was approaching the elevator to leave. "Rescue?" one of the males asked. "I doubt it," I said. "They're here to clean up this mess, including witnesses." "You don't know that," another one said. "What are they gonna do, kill us?" "Yes," security guy said. His name was Ken and he was indeed a security guard in the lab. The last one left was my guess. They are here for the data and to eliminate anyone still active, alive, including me. "So who the hell are you then?" one of the scientists asked me. I decided to come clean. It was doubtful we were going to live through this anyway. "I'm just a data thief. Some guy hired me to crack his boss's computer since he had the plans to this lab hidden on it. Said there might be money in the lab if I wanted to sneak in with his boss's number. I saw the camera feed from the dude's computer that showed the first floor was deserted. And I came and didn't get out fast enough." "Did you get the plans?" Ken asked. "I did," I said. He gave a half smile. "I'd lose them if I were you." I could tell by his voice he wasn't trying to threaten me, it was more like advice. You the girlfriend? I asked the female scientist. I figured she would know what I was talking about. Yeah, she said. She was a brunette, long hair. Not anymore though. Why? I asked surprised. One of the male scientists started to look nervous. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nervous scientist said. He was now sweating up a storm. What the hell is going on? Ken asked. Ask him, she said, motioning to the guy. We'll call him Phil. Everybody started to crowd around Phil. All I was supposed to do was sabotage the experiment, slow it down. He started. It would disrupt the lab long enough for him to hire someone to steal the blueprints. Coupled with the experiment data you stole, the plan was to sell both on the black market, the girlfriend finished. Her name was Molly. So that was that second alert in the guy's email, the one about the unauthorized download. Phil seemed like he was complete moron. Way out of his league trying to do espionage. Molly then explained after the initial breach and the chaos following, she found Phil's phone on the floor, which his dumbass had left unlocked. It contained conversations with her now ex-boyfriend about what they were up to. The messages were apparently coded to avoid suspicion, but being involved in the project, she knew what they were talking about immediately. She met up with him shortly before finding more survivors in Lab 2 and made him tell her everything. What did you do? Ken asked. I changed the coordinates. Instead of 15 I entered 51, Phil said. You changed the coordinates having no idea where the fuck they would go? Ken said very smoothly. Phil was in trouble. Nothing was actually supposed to come through. Phil wailed. Ken walked over to a workstation and picked up a piece of rubble off the floor, a short metal shaft. It was basically a lead pipe. Something did come through though, didn't it? He started towards Phil. No. There's no need for that, Phil yelled, knowing what was coming. This is your fault, you got everybody killed. You don't get to live through this, Ken said. He raised the pipe high and clobbered Phil with it. Molly screamed. The sound of the pipe hitting Phil's head was incredibly gross. Watching Ken hit him a couple more times while he was down was very visceral. Nothing like in the movies, it was disgusting and I have a strong stomach. Probably for everyone else's sake, Ken then ripped off Phil's lab coat, which now had red stains on it, and covered up what used to be his head. Anybody mind filling me in? I asked. Obviously I was completely in the dark about whatever the hell they were talking about. You don't have the clearance. One of the other male scientists said. His name was Jeff. Would you shut the hell up? Molly interrupted him. Look around. Who cares at this point, seriously? Molly then proceeded to tell me what they were up to. In a nutshell, they were attempting to create a wormhole. The initial plan was to open a wormhole to a sister lab in Geneva, Switzerland, and pass through it to travel to the other side of the world instantaneously. If perfected, this technology could be the first step for humankind to travel beyond our solar system with manned missions. How would it even work? I asked. The coordinate system we use is kind of like an IP address. It consists of 6 numbers instead of 4. These numbers range from 0 to potentially infinity. A set of coordinates might be 0.1.2.3.4.10,000,000, for example, she explained. So they could go anywhere, I said. I'm kind of a science fiction nerd, I was following what they were saying for the most part. Anywhere, Molly repeated. Not just our universe either, based on what we know. With a potentially infinite number of coordinate sets, we could end up in another dimension entirely if we're not careful. That's what my money is on, Ken added. I can't believe such horrible creatures as the ones that escaped into the lab exist somewhere in our known universe, aliens or not. I have to admit, being a gamer, all this talk of wormholes and other dimensions had me thinking of Half-Life or Doom, especially given the creatures I had seen myself looked like they were straight out of hell. So, I started. It works then. You guys actually open a wormhole. Where did this technology even come from? There was a silent pause. The technology itself is alien, the other male scientist said, the one without the stick up his ass. There's at least 2 different instances of the same alien race visiting Earth, one confirmed. We'll call him Bob since I never found out what his name was. Go on, I said. A couple years ago 4 college professors went camping in a Canadian provincial park in Ontario. They went to the wilderness campsites via canoe out in BFE. One of them went scuba diving and discovered an aircraft at the bottom of the lake, which was found to be extraterrestrial. Somehow they gained access and found the body of the pilot, which they then smuggled into the US and back to their lab. Their examinations of the ET resulted in all but one of their deaths. The United States government put a lid on the situation and were able to secretly recover both the pilot and the aircraft, where this wormhole technology was found. It must be how they travel the galaxy. What about the other visit from these aliens? You said there were two, I asked. That one is unconfirmed, though we can effectively prove it happened. Apparently a group of cowboys back in the late 1800s investigated a meteor that looked like it landed on a mountain near their town. They found it and had no idea it was supposedly a crashed UFO. They noted a substance in the water and one of them was later bitten by something that was covered in it. He grew ill quickly and supposedly died and came back to life, resulting in an outbreak of undead. Undead? I asked in a get the fuck out of here kind of tone. I'm kind of sick of zombies these days. They aren't even real. The story goes the outbreak occurred and there was only one survivor from the entire town. He and a couple Native Americans killed everyone infected and burned the whole town to the ground, wiping it off the map, and then made the trail up to the mountain peak impassable. And you can prove this all happened? I asked. I was intrigued though still skeptical. The pilot we recovered, Molly interjected. He's the proof. He had a bodily fluid secreted from a special gland that repaired his body from severe injury. It apparently can't bring them back to life though if they are actually killed since he drowned. This fluid was not compatible with any Earth-based life and those test subjects that received injections ended up dying from it. It acted very much like a virus even though it wasn't. Though it did work in keeping their brain functions barely active, effectively making them a zombie. There is only one report of any actual human surviving intrusion from this fluid, supposedly someone from the ruined town, but there was no way to know if he was simply immune somehow or if it would have actually worked in regenerating injuries since he blew himself up inside an old mine. As the story goes anyway. There was a non-human successful test, Bob added. Those scientists injected a lab rat who didn't succumb to the fluid's negative effects. It escaped during their experiments but we were able to recover it. The scientists had removed the gland that secreted the fluid from the alien so it stopped secreting it. We were able to extract the fluid from the mouse however once the samples they had taken were all used up since the mouse regenerated itself though we couldn't figure out why its body accepted the fluid. I'm guessing you did plenty of experimentation, I said. We did, Bob said. We were not able to replicate a single successful test and the mouse was eventually killed in an act of sabotage by a mole, spy, so we moved on to the aircraft and our wormhole project. I wondered how many human subjects they used. Ken spoke up. Now that we're all up to speed, we need to find a way out of here. Those things are out there, Jeff said. If we stay here we're dead, Ken said. Once security is done here or when they confront these creatures, if they haven't already, and realize they are no match for most of them they're going to blow the entire lab. They can't just blow the lab, Jeff said. We're downtown and on the top floor of a high-rise. He was right. There would be an awful lot of collateral damage if they blew the lab and tried to blame it on terrorists. A massive amount of debris would rain down onto the streets below. It's a special kind of self-destruct, Ken started. Initially all the oxygen will be sucked out of the lab, suffocating anything still inside. After a few minutes it pushes it all back in and sparks a flame burst on each floor that acts as a giant incendiary grenade, which will absolutely incinerate everything in the lab. Nowhere in the lab complex will be safe from this fire blast. So what's our plan? Bob asked. The only way out is the elevator, Ken said. We've got to somehow get down there. If and when the commandos engage these creatures, is it possible the two guarding the elevator will attempt to rejoin the squad as backup? I asked. They'd be disobeying orders, but they might, Ken said. So our best bet is still to sneak back downstairs, I said. The security office area down there was the first thing they secured. If we can somehow get there and hide until they are finished or distracted by the creatures we might be able to get to the elevators. Here's what we're gonna do, Ken started. Right at the end of this hallway is the exit back out into the main perimeter. We'll go downstairs and hide out a minute. I have a hunch if they are following proper formation for securing the area they will have already cleared that one and will proceed up from the stairwell opposite from where we'll be. We'll sneak into administration and hide out since they should be done by now in there. So that was our plan. Not a very good one, I know, but we didn't have much else to go on. Everybody grabbed something off the floor, anything we could find. Pipes, some jagged pieces of metal, anything. I looked around for an extinguisher but apparently somebody had already taken it during the initial lockdown. Bob positioned himself at the door switch and upon receiving the word opened the doors. Ken went first and peeked out into the hall. He raised his arm up and did a waving motion signaling everyone it was clear. We inched our way towards the glass door at the end of hallway, the bright lights pouring in. We didn't hear anything that sounded like baby spiders behind us so that was a relief. I got to the door first and I tried to peek out without opening it but I really couldn't see much. I carefully popped it open and looked outside. The hallway was empty but I was more worried about sound than anything. I didn't hear Kong's heavy thuds when it walked. I wondered if we might have lucked out and he went back into the kitchen or something. We quietly went out into the hall, Ken once again leading the way to the stairwell we needed. Upon reach the corner he peeked out around it. The main hall turned to the right and the stairwell door was right in front of us. He then crossed the hall quickly and went into the stairwell. He held the door open from inside as he motioned for us to follow. Molly went first, then Bob with me right behind. I was in the door frame when I heard Jeff shriek. "Oh my God," he yelled. At the end of the hall was Kong, up on his hind legs. He did the ground pound with both his club hands and charged. Jeff dove into the stairwell and Kong crashed into the wall outside the door within seconds. It then punched the door and it flew off the hinges like it weighed nothing. He was way too big to fit in the door, but all he would need to do was back up and he could charge right through the frame. "Downstairs," Ken said. "Contact," an authoritative voice said from below. It was a commando. Ken's hopeful analysis that they would use the opposite stairwell was wrong. "Thank God," Jeff said. "Help us," he screamed as he started running downstairs before anyone could do anything to stop him. Shots were fired a second later. More shots came up towards us, but they had been fired blindly. "Back up," I yelled. I looked back at the door. Kong was backing up, he was getting ready to charge again. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but we literally had no choice. We had to go up to the third floor, ground zero. "Upstairs," I yelled. Our only hope was that somewhere up there it was safe. More shots came at us as we went up. We got to the door as Kong crashed through the wall. "Jesus!" We heard a commando cry out. "What the fuck is that?" the other said. "Command, contacts engaged, it's some kind of." He was cut off as I heard Kong make his horrible pod race engine and gurgling sounds. Automatic machine gun fire followed. "Send backup now," the other soldier yelled. He made it back downstairs and got out of Kong's reach. From what little I could see, Kong was far too big to actually go up or down the stairs, so that was A+. He stayed around the big hole in the wall he made though, so we still couldn't go back down. "We might have a chance to get to the elevator," Ken said. "They might break formation after that encounter and leave the elevator. All we needed to do was get to another stairwell and get back downstairs and we might have a chance." Ken opened the door and the boop alarm could once again be heard. I'm guessing it was the lockdown alarm sound. We cautiously exited out into the hallway. The first thing I noticed was the white was gone. It was very dark since the lights were out. The emergency lighting was on, but it wasn't that bright. The second thing I noticed was that there was red everywhere. If the lights had been on, we would have noticed the bright white we were used to in the main perimeter hallway was barely visible. Blood smears were everywhere, and every so often chunks of some kind would be stuck to the wall. Intestines or guts? The breach definitely resulted in a massacre. "Run for it," Ken yelled. He pointed to the opposite end of the hallway towards a stairwell door. We probably shouldn't have run. About halfway down we heard what sounded like a helicopter taking off. A few seconds later the culprit rounded the corner in front of us. It was like a giant wasp, only worse of course. Its wings were smaller than I thought they'd be before I realized how they were attached. It was a quadruped. It had 4 appendages that I couldn't discern as arms or legs, but the wings were attached to these instead of its actual body. Each appendage had 2 wings attached to it and each appendage was attached to what I initially thought was its body until I saw 2 large eyes on it and realized the body was also its head. It was irregularly rounded and in between both eyes was a mouth that it kept opening and closing quickly, like it was chomping. The mouth ran up and down vertically and opened sideways, as opposed to how mouths are supposed to open. It paused when it saw us. "Shit!" Ken hollered. "Back up." "In here," Molly shouted, standing next to a door that led back into the lab areas. The wasp thing started flying toward us. A stinger readied itself from somewhere out of its ass. It was huge. We all got inside just in time. We moved away from the door quickly to make it less attractive for the wasp thing to try and get in. Luckily the hall was small enough it would have made moving difficult for it. We kind of ran blindly, making a couple turns here and there. Lights were flickering, electronics were sparking with ZZZT sounds everywhere, and the intermittent, calm boop from the alarm were all that could be heard. "Oh my God, it's Lab 6, Bob said. "Don't go in there." Ken was already there. "Jesus Christ, the hole is still open, for fuck's sake. We gotta shut it down." Perhaps it was just extreme luck that nothing was in Lab 6 when we got there, or maybe there were no more creatures in the vicinity of the hole wherever it had opened. I could see a world somewhere through the hole. Somewhere else in the universe or in another dimension or somewhere awful. It looked desolate and barren. It looked like a raging storm was taking place. The sky was bright and dark at the same time, As if it was the brightest time of the day, yet the storm made it look like night. Smoky, sooty plumes blew about the land of rocks and crags, not a single tree or plant visible. "Shut it down!" Ken hollered again. "We can't," Bob shouted. "Why?" "Break the damn thing!" I hollered. The machine generating the wormhole was like a mounted machine gun or laser. It was a tubular, elongated contraption with sky blue energy being fired out the tip with a deep hum. The energy extended out about 10 feet where it created a perfect circle, the wormhole. Ken started smacking it with his pipe and I followed suit. After a couple seconds we heard a plop behind us. "Look out," Bob shouted. "Something's coming through." A big, fat tentacle plopped down on the floor through the wormhole, covering the entire opening. Ken started hitting the laser harder. The tentacle wiggled around on the ground for a few seconds before it split itself into a second tentacle. It then split again, then again. Before we knew it, the thick base of the tentacle now had 5 smaller tentacles wiggling around. They then started to reshape themselves. Ken and I hit harder. The laser was starting to flicker, but it hadn't gone out yet. "Oh my God!" We heard Molly scream. The tentacles had formed a crude representation of a giant hand. The tentacle hand began feeling around wildly. When it couldn't find anything, the giant tentacle it was attached to slithered further into the room, continuing to feel around with large thuds as it slammed down. The laser was starting to come apart, the beam was flickering and bits of metal were flying off of the main contraption. "AHH, Ken yelled out. The tentacle hand had grabbed him and had begun pulling him back towards the hole. I frantically batted at the machine and finally broke something vital. The blue energy shut off and the hole closed. It chopped the hand off a few feet from the hole and it let Ken go. The tentacle hand writhed around on the floor and began to shrivel. It eventually stopped moving. "Keep moving," Ken said, out of breath. "Gotta get off this floor." We continued on and came to the south side of the 3rd floor, opposite where we came in. The destruction was incredible. Something had been plowing its way through walls left and right. There were holes everywhere. Maybe whatever it was responsible for the holes in the floor that let some of the creatures out down there. "Oh God," I heard Bob say behind us. I turned around and found him looking up. I joined his gaze and saw bodies strung up above. They were cocooned in some kind of webbing. I could see shoes poking out the bottom of some webs, and heads poking out of others, shriveled like raisins as if their insides had all been sucked out. Then it hit me, giant webs, life sucked out, the spider thing. "We need to get the fuck out of here now," I said. I caught a glimpse of a large hole in the floor nearby. Thank God the giant torso spider thing must have still been down below if this was his hole. We moved on quickly but didn't get far. Another creature appeared from around a ruined chunk of wall. It was like a giant, hellish frog. Its fat body was hunched and it had massive hind legs that made it look like it could leap a mile into the air. Its eyes were attached to antenna-like tubes and its face looked like a big, fat, frowning fish. Tentacles drooped from its face and it appeared to have spikes jutting out from various parts of its body. There were also several mouths with jagged teeth about its body in several places, chomping and gnashing like they all needed a meal. "Run," I yelled. We all turned around and ran the other way. Bob was the last in line and didn't make it. I turned around to see if it was chasing us and it hadn't moved, but it didn't need to. It opened its mouth and a giant, long tongue shot out and wrapped itself around Bob, fast as lightning. This tongue must have been 35 feet long. It retracted and it opened its big fish mouth wider than I would have thought possible and swallowed Bob whole. "Get away from it," I yelled as we ran. We lost sight of Ken, who was hollering something up ahead. Molly and I turned left down a hall and could see baby spiders up ahead on the ceiling, the same ones I had seen before, but they were getting bigger. We heard what sounded like a combination of a foghorn and a deep, throaty growl. Something crashed through the wall up ahead, completely crushing the spiders. It was big. Much larger than Kong. It stood on 2 legs and looked like a bastardized amalgamation of the Hulk, Abomination, and Thing from comic books. It had 3 arms, 2 on the left, each one bigger than tree trunks. Its back was arched, extending its back and neck above its head, and giant crag-looking bones lined its spinal column all the way up. Its head looked like a lobster head, but it had 4 eyes, 2 on top and 2 more below what I could only imagine was its mouth. Tentacles lined its face as if it were a makeshift, horrible beard. It had a crab-like claw as a hand on its lower left arm. It reared back and let out another growl/horn noise, this time much louder. Then it charged at us. It completely annihilated the small hallway we were standing in, but didn't slow down one bit. Molly and I both turned and ran back to the fork in the hallway. We both went in opposite direction and it crashed by us and kept going. It was like a juggernaut, nothing could stop it, but I wondered how well it could stop itself once it got going. I could hear more unknown noises, so I looked for anywhere I could hide to catch my bearings. I ducked into a small office that was clear and shut the door. I caught my breath for a second as I ducked behind the desk. There was no way we were getting off this floor. Hell Wasp was patrolling the main hall, Spider Spawn were running around cocooning shit, Tongue Frog could get me from a mile away, and Tank Lobster was about to destroy the entire floor. Clever nicknames, I know. After a few minutes it seemed quiet out there. The boop from the alarm was all I could hear. Ken was probably dead at this point, Molly too. Part of me wanted to look for them. Normally I'd be all about myself and give zero shits about anyone else. I needed to complete the job and avoid getting caught and going to jail. If that meant someone else had to go down so I continue on, so be it. This time though, it felt wrong to just leave without knowing if they were dead or not. I knew deep down that if I went looking for them there was a much greater risk of me getting killed than if I made a break for the exit on my own. I decided in the end I had to look out for number one, me, but if I came across them again I'd try my damnedest to make sure we all get out. I popped the office door open and peered out. I couldn't hear Tank Lobster's destruction or his growl. I didn't see any spiders either. I decided I at least needed to get back to the main hall or near it to have a chance at getting to the stairs. The good news was that Tank Lobster had destroyed a large portion of the floor, so a more direct path might be found. The downside to that was Hell Wasp might be able to buzz in further to where I was with so many walls down. The thought that Tank Lobster might destroy too many support walls and the entire ceiling might come down did enter my mind, but at that point it was something I didn't have time to worry about. I slowly made my way down the hallway back to the fork where we had split. I passed through a couple big holes in walls thinking this must be the way to the perimeter hallway. I passed a couple more cocoons looking all around me but didn't see any spiders. I passed Lab 4 on my way. Lots of flickering lights and buzzing electronics accompanied the never-ending boop. I walked through to the back wall and out another hole. There was lots of rubble here and there and I kicked a chunk of wall I didn't see in the low light and nearly fell over. My foot didn't feel like I broke anything, so I looked down to see the piece of shit I kicked and was taken aback. It wasn't a chunk of wall debris or even cement at all. It was my backpack. It had a tear and a bunch of small puncture holes probably from spider teeth as well as some slime on it, but it was otherwise intact. I unzipped it and the money was still inside, sealed bag and all. I thought to myself, at least I'll die rich. I slung the backpack over my shoulder and continued. I saw Tongue Frog in a room about 3 rooms down through a bunch of wall holes. It hopped around a couple times away from me but then it stopped. The mouths I could see on its back continued to gnash ferociously. It didn't turn around, so I carefully and quietly crept towards what I thought was the way towards the perimeter hallway. I passed through what appeared to be a locker room. The decontamination showers were leaking water all over the place. Wait! I heard from my left as I was passing some lockers. It was Molly, hiding in a locker. "Let me out," she whispered loudly. I undid the latch and helped her out. We walked forward through another hole and I stopped abruptly. Tank Lobster was standing about 50 feet to our left. I could see him through several holes. His back was to us, so he hadn't seen us. He was literally just standing there quietly aside from his respirations, which sounded like a diesel engine. I put my finger to my lips to signal Molly to stay quiet. I wondered if he was the type of creature that kept to itself until potential prey was in sight. Like he hadn't heard or seen anybody for a while, so he stopped to chill out. Maybe all that running tired it out and it was sleeping. I obviously had no way of knowing its true hunting habits, but I thought staying quiet seemed the most logical. As we made our way slowly away from it, we heard the sound of machine gun fire. The commandos were definitely on this floor somewhere. Something else then ran through my mind, something that got me very scared. Please don't let those shots alert Tank Lobster. They did. He jolted with a deep, hellish grunt, as if it actually had been asleep, and began looking around while making terrible noises. "Move!" I say as loudly as I can while trying to stay quiet. It was too late though, he had already seen us. It let out its loud, horrible, throaty horn/growl and began to charge. It plowed through walls that already had holes in them, making bigger holes. We ran for it, but it was closing fast. Knowing it had a hard time stopping, before it was almost to us, I grabbed Molly and threw us both through a hole in the wall to our right. It blew by, but I heard it stop. Within seconds it was in front of us again. These goddamn creatures were so unpredictable. We tried to scramble to our feet as it approached, each footstep thundering on the floor and leaving little craters and cracks on the floor. It kept opening and closing its crab hand as it approached. I prepared for the end, knowing we wouldn't get far even if we did get up and make a run for it. Out of nowhere a figure in black appeared from behind it and swung whatever he was holding at Tank Lobster's head with everything he had. Tank Lobster let out a disgusting, throaty, diesel engine that was pulling 30,000 pounds up a hill howl of pain. It thrashed around widely, but I could see it was a fire axe stuck in the left side of its face, a deep teal liquid pouring out which I can only assume was its blood. Even though it thrashed wildly in pain, I questioned if this would be enough to put it down. "Move your asses." It was Ken. He was covered in blood, sweat, and grime but was still kicking. We got up and started to move again, but Ken stood his ground for a minute. He picked an oxygen tank up off the floor, tossed it under the writhing creature as it ripped the axe out of its face. He then produced a grenade out of a pocket somewhere, pulled the pin and rolled it underneath the creature. "Move," he yelled. We had already started. We got behind a wall to get some shielding from the explosion, which went off a few seconds later. I wasn't sure if the oxygen tank actually helped like it would in the movies, but when I peeked out I saw that Tank Lobster was definitely not only on fire but was waving back and forth on its feet, like its bell just got rung something hard and it was about to fall. After a few seconds it fell to its right and crashed through a wall that was still up. Even when it died it still took a wall down. There was no time to celebrate though, there were still creatures active. "Most of the soldiers are dead," Ken said. "Got that grenade off of one." "Looks like it worked," I said. We made it out to the perimeter hallway, the stairway door in sight. We listened for the helicopter buzzing and didn't hear anything, so we moved towards the door in a power walk kind of manner, not to make too much noise. We made it to the door and started downstairs. I couldn't believe we were off that hell floor. Of course we couldn't go all the way down to the first floor. Below the second floor landing some spider spawn, with their 20-some legs, not as many as Big Daddy, yet anyway, and torso heads that were getting larger and larger, were in the process of cocooning some dead commandos. We got off on the second floor. There was no sign of Kong out in the hallway. It was a simple straight shot ahead to the opposite stairwell, so we started for it. We got about halfway when Kong crashed through a wall ahead out us, lumbering around aimlessly. He was hurt, favoring his right arm, and it looked crooked as he held it close to his body. It looked like it had taken a rocket or a grenade blast on that side. It limped around, not appearing to notice us. It had what I can only imagine were bullet holes all over its body. I couldn't tell what color its apparent blood was, but it looked like it had definitely been shot up to hell. He was still trucking though. We went in a door nearby that led into the lab area to get out of sight for a minute. Hopefully Kong would just go away and we could make it to the stairs. There was a thud somewhere above us. It sounded like a battering ram or something hitting a door. There was another one, then another one. They seemed to be getting stronger with each thud. The ceiling began to crack and particles and dust started to fall to the floor about 30 feet down the hallway. Eventually the ceiling gave way a few seconds later in a marvelously destructive way, and Tank Lobster crashed down to the floor along with a mountain of rubble and dust. We quickly ducked into a nearby office before he saw us. So much for just hanging out if it couldn't find anything. "Jesus Christ, how do we kill this thing?" Ken asked. "We probably don't," Molly said. "Can we just avoid it again and get to the elevator?" "I doubt it," I said. "How secure are the doors to the elevator?" "More so than a standard elevator," Ken started. "But if it smashed its way through the floor like that, those elevator doors will be like tin foil. It'll get through those and then smash its way out of the elevator shaft." We could hear its thundering footsteps outside. It was only walking at this point, probably orienting itself to its surroundings. A deep, male voice came over the loudspeaker. "Self-destruct protocol initiated. Vacate the premises immediately. This is not a drill. Proceed immediately to the access elevator. Fire blast in 10 minutes. A deep, annoying buzz then started alarming at standard intervals and red lights could be seen flashing. Before we could freak out about the self-destruct, we heard Tank Lobster let out its horn/diesel engine noise and it suddenly crashed through a wall of the office we were hiding in. It was burned pretty badly from the blast it took and its crab arm looked pretty banged up, but it didn't seem like it was going to slow down anytime soon. It let out another one of its sounds, but before it moved we heard a machine gun firing from behind it. I could see what was probably the last commando, barely alive, limping towards it. He started to reload as Tank Lobster moved towards him. He must have set the destruct, or maybe someone else was still active. It didn't matter. It was obvious this guy was about to die, but he wasn't going out like a punk. He finished reloading and fired again. The bullets drew blood, but the rounds he was firing were simply far too low a caliber for such a large target. Anyway, Tank Lobster stalked towards him and the guy ditched his gun and grabbed something on his chest as he waited for Tanky to get to him. Against my better judgment I moved a little closer to see what was up this guy's sleeve. From what I could see, he had a grenade belt strung around himself diagonally across his torso and back. He readies himself by taking the belt off as Tank Lobster grabs him and scoops him up. It holds him up high, probably getting ready to eat him when the guy yanks the pin of a grenade. This guy had rigged his belt. When he pulled a pin, he had it set up so that it pulled all the others out as well. Seeing this, I motioned for everyone to run for it. I'm not sure where he put the belt, around Tank Lobster's neck or in his mouth when he opened it, but there was literally a deafening boom and we all hit the deck. The blast took out a large section of the offices and parts of the hallway. I felt dazed and could hear bells ringing, but I got up and looked over and saw Tank Lobster down on a knee, the entire right side of its body and most of its head gone, before it fell with a thud. It had to be dead. It had to be. Fire blast in 8 minutes, the announcer said. We had to move. Ken got Molly up and we checked the hallway again. Kong had lumbered off somewhere, so we made for the stairwell. It was clear, so we went back down to the first floor. I was first, so I peeked out the little window to see if anyone or anything was out there. It was clear. We went out into the hall and this time we ran for it. The elevator was going to be after the right turn at the end of the hallway. If the 2 guards who were ordered to stay were there, we were probably dead. I peeked around the corner and it was clear. We called the elevator and got on. I heard the announcer say there were 7 minutes left until the destruct as the doors closed. Glad we didn't cut it down to the wire. All 3 of us were filthy, sweat, grime, blood, dust, plaster, or all of the above. When we were back in the security office, I told them I turned off the cameras, so at least on this floor they didn't need to worry. They would be able to get to a bathroom to tidy themselves up. We said our goodbyes and I gave both of them 15 grand to help them out. Ken understood about laying low, but I told Molly she would probably need to rebuild her life. Lay low and don't use any social media or electronic currency. Contact family only through snail mail or postcards. I know what you're thinking. This is the part where I tell you that I'm on the run now from the government and need to disappear, yet I still have time to post my ordeal here on Reddit. Well, that's the thing, I'm not really on the run. I am laying low for a while though. I guess I'm not worried because I'm already off the grid. All my social media accounts are fake and my face was covered on any camera I appeared on. They have nothing on me. As for the lab data, I still have the blueprints. Not sure why I'm keeping them, but I think someday I might send them to the news station anonymously and see what happens. I still think about the lab. Sometimes I lay awake wondering if anything was able to survive the fire blast somehow and are still up there. Sure would be crazy. One last little thing before I go. I kind of lied to you. I did take one last job after I escaped the lab and the building. Remember my client, the now ex-boyfriend of Molly? She asked what she should do right before we left. He knew where all her family lived and if he wanted to flush her out it would be real easy. I told her I'll take care of him. Remember way back at the start when I emphasized I wasn't a hitman? I became one, for one night only. I won't get into the gory details, but basically I knifed him in his bathroom with his own kitchen knife as he got ready for bed. Molly told me where he lived and that he didn't have any cameras set up in the house. She gave me her key to his place before we parted. No forced entry, it was almost too easy. I've been double-crossed many times in my line of work. It wasn't that big of a deal. It just felt personal this time. Like Ken said to that scientist, you don't get to live through this. So that's it. I had a rough day at the office. Eventually I'll take up work again. I guess I don't really need the money anymore, I just don't like to get bored.